Hello, it's Sam here, back again with another video, and today is a different type of video, different type of interview, because we've had YouTubers, comedians, rappers, boxers on, but today we have a football finance expert, according to yourself, not an expert, just a university lecturer on football finance. Firstly, Kieran, thank you for coming onto my YouTube channel.
Thank you. Thanks very much for the invite. It's a pleasure.
How have you been keeping during lockdown?
Coping so far, so good. There's people on the front line who are putting their lives at risk. I've got it relatively easy. I can do all my teaching online. Missing my friends, missing my football, missing going to music, but we can cope. Myself and my wife and the dog, we're a close unit. Our granddaughter arrived recently, so not being able to see her is sad though.
Well, we're gonna be all over the place today, but to start. You said, or you found something recently, that Tottenham Hotspur were the most valuable squad in the Premier League, right? So how did you come to that conclusion? Because I think the common theme or the common thing that people would think would probably Manchester City or Liverpool or even Manchester United, but you found Tottenham Hotspur. How did you come to that conclusion?
Well, it was valuing the club as a business rather than valuing it in terms of football success. So what we do is that we use a financial model which was devised by a guy called Dr. Tom Markham. And Dr. Tom is a former student here at the University of Liverpool. That's where he was one of our football MBA students, and he is now the head of special projects at SI Games. So for any of you that ever play Football Manager, SI Games is that part of your life where you've thrown thousands of hours of non-stop geekery into it. Tom's a smart guy, so he came up with this formula, this theory, for his doctorate. And what it does is it looks at a football club as a business, pure and simple. So therefore, we look at profitability. Will Spurs make more profits than any other club in the Premier League? We look at wage control. Spurs pay out less money in wages than the other clubs. Yeah, they spend over £100 million less than Manchester United, Liverpool, Manchester City, Chelsea, and so on. And on the back of that, they delivered in terms of the financial results. They got to the Champions League final, so they made nearly £100 million from that. And they finished fourth in the Premier League, so therefore they qualified for the Champions League this season as well. So all of those are more money coming in, really good cost control. They've got this amazing new stadium, which is a license to print money. So you put all of those factors into a big spreadsheet, and that just crunches out the numbers. So it takes all of the emotion. All of what we love as football fans is taken away, and it's done on a purely monetary basis. I was a little bit surprised. So it was Spurs who came top at around about £2.5 billion, followed by Manchester City, and that again surprises people. But remember, Manchester City, they sold 10% of the club a few months ago at a world record price. So that does tie in broadly with what we're looking at there. Third, Manchester United, and then I think fourth it was Liverpool. But I expect Liverpool to go shooting up the table because their figures were based at the 31st of May, and of course they won the Champions League trophy 2 days later, and all the money that brought in.
So you'd expect probably Liverpool to be up there or thereabouts.
Yeah, I'm expecting Liverpool to reach the top three. This season, though everything's going to be distorted by the impact of the coronavirus. Clearly, that's going to really hit football hard, just as like it's doing to many industries.
And talking about the financial implications of the coronavirus on football, there's been a plan set out by the Premier League and the government, which is Project Restart. How do you think? Do you think it will go ahead firstly?
There will be some form of restoration of football at some point in time. Realistically, we are not going to see football as fans for the rest of this year. I think that's very optimistic, and the government and other parties have been drip feeding that into commentary. It's very difficult to justify having mass gatherings of people when there are potential super spreaders amongst fan bases who could go to a match not willingly trying to infect others, because they might be asymptomatic at the time, but there could be a downside, and we have seen football matches in some other countries, in Spain and Italy, prove to be hotspots in terms of the spread of the disease. So football needs to survive somehow. So therefore, we need to focus on two things: money coming in and money going out. In terms of money coming in, as far as the Premier League is concerned, the biggest cash generator is TV. So there's nothing to stop the cameras from being set up in grounds. Some of the work can be done remotely. We can still observe social distancing rules and regulations. It will be tough for the players. I think Glenn Murray said last week, how do you line up for a corner? Because the very nature is you're not going to be 2 meters apart. So there are fears, and remember that we often see footballers as robots, as commodities, but actually their husbands, their boyfriends, their dads, they might have elderly parents staying with them who are ill. So therefore, under those circumstances, you can't go home. So we've got to think about this very carefully in terms of how we deliver football. But it does need the money to come in, because, as everybody knows, the footballers' wage bills are high, and the total wage bill for the Premier League last season was over £3 billion. So the clubs have got to cover that somehow.
And one of the things that's being mentioned right now is neutral grounds, football being played on neutral grounds. But the bottom six Premier League teams have voted against that sort of idea. They think that will be, they'll be at a disadvantage if that happens because of their relegation fight, and they want this. If the season could be played out, relegation to be taken out of the equation. Do you think that is feasible in any way?
You can see why the bottom that they are concerned about losing home advantage. Aston Villa, for example, have got 10 games left, of which 6 are at home. So if they now all go to be played in neutral venues, relatively, Aston Villa will be worse off. So if I was a Villa fan, if I was a Villa owner or director, I would be lobbying for relegation to effectively be suspended for this season. That would, of course, cause issues as far as the Championship are concerned. So one of the suggestions is that next season the Premier League is extended to 22 or 23 clubs. That will bring with it a further set of complications, because we're likely to have a very congested fixture card. If you think about it, if you are a club which has qualified for the Champions League, you could have 12, 13 matches to take place in the Champions League, 44 or 46 league games, Carabao Cup, FA Cup. It's simply not going to work. And how do you fit in the winter break? How do you fit in international breaks and things of this nature? So you can see why those clubs want it. You can see why Sky and BT don't want it, because the relegation fight is just as entertaining from a viewing point of view as the fight to win the Premier League. And the thing is, Liverpool have won the Premier League. We all know they have, and they've won so deservedly. It's just got to be formally confirmed. So there will be a lot of WhatsApp groups. There will be lots of whispers. There'll be lots of meetings being held on Zoom and so on between the club owners and the chief executives to try to come up with a solution which suits everybody. Ultimately, there's always going to be winners and losers, though. Yeah.
And one of the things that you've just mentioned is about the TV broadcasting and TV broadcasters and how they are the generators of money for the Premier League. One of the things that's been mentioned is that the Premier League games, if it does return, would be on Freetoair TV. Do you think that would be possible, considering that the TV broadcaster Sky and BT are the main generators financially for the Premier League?
I think what might happen is that a few games will be put on free to air. just because there are many elderly people, there are many people who have limited incomes, there will be many people whose jobs have been furloughed or have been made redundant, and they won't be able to afford the sums charged by the likes of BT Sport and Sky. They're still football fans. We've had enough of. I've watched every singles box set that's going, as far as I'm concerned. So there's not a lot to watch live. I think it would be good for the nation if, even if it's just one match a week, was free to air. I think that would be a great gesture by the Premier League, and it would still allow Sky and BT to broadcast the matches that they've contracted for. And then I'd also anticipate that what will happen to the remainder of the games is that the Premier League clubs, they all have a database of their season ticket holders, and they will send them links to those matches taking place on a match by match basis. So I've got a season ticket for my club. I've got 5 home matches remaining, and that's a bit of a frustration. But if the club says, well, we're going to give you a link and you'll get to see not only the home games but the away games as well, I'd say to myself, well, under those circumstances, they're doing all they can. I'm not going to ask for a refund. Some people will be asking for a refund simply because they've lost their jobs, and they'll, every penny counts. But as somebody that's still in employment, everybody wants to be a bit flexible. And
something that you just previously mentioned was about the wages of these footballers. Do you think that there'll be a permanent reduction in their wages, and the wage bill will come down for the Premier League?
In the very short term, it will come down a little bit. It certainly won't be going up. I think part of the problem is that football clubs have committed to pay players on contracts, and it's a legal document. So if we take a look at Manchester United and David De Gea, he signed a 6-year extension to his contract. He was going to be out of contract this summer. He signed a 6-year extension. Now, it's estimated, and I always take these figures with a pinch of salt, it's estimated that over the 6 years, he could earn £111 million. If Manchester United come to him and say, we want you to take a 30% pay cut, David De Gea is perfectly entitled to say, well, that's a breach of my contract. I'm therefore going to walk away, and you're not going to get a transfer fee. So he could go to Madrid, he could go to Barcelona, he could go to Paris, and he could be offered a better wage deal than on the table from United. So in terms of those players who have contracts which have a few years outstanding, I don't think there'll be significant reductions, unless you and I are having this conversation in 6 months' time, and there's still no sign of football returning, in which case all rules are off. In terms of players that are being signed on transfers or coming through youth academy contracts to getting their first professional contract, I would expect reductions in the sums which are available to them.
And talking about the players' contracts, one of the things that keeps on talking about when talking about the project restart, the Premier League restart, is talking about the contracts being up by June the 30th, and how can players play? Some players will be free agents and will still be playing football, so they can't actually play for their clubs. Like Odi and Igalo, for example, for Manchester United, would be out of contract. So how would that work? Would they be able to sort of tie in some sort of extension, or is that not feasible?
I think this is actually a very important issue that you raise, in the sense that what might work for one player might not work for another. So it will cause a distortion. It will cause a ripple in the game for those fixtures which take place after the 30th of June. Now, in the case of the Premier League, there are relatively few players that will be effectively out of contract. But as we drop down into the EFL, especially in Leagues 1 and 2, where players are on 1 and 2 year contracts, we could see clubs losing 8-10 players in a squad because they're all on short-term deals. The club might make them an offer which the players don't find acceptable. So it's going to cause an awful lot of trouble. It's going to be very, very messy indeed after the 30th of June. And certainly talking to some friends who are lawyers, they say that I think this particular issue which you've raised, which is a very valid one, could really have a significant impact upon the integrity of the game in terms of, if you're a fan of Accrington or Rochdale, the players that take place for your first 11 on the 2nd of July could be completely different from the ones that were playing for you the previous week.
And we've already seen some EFL clubs that are struggling to cope with this financially. How much longer do you think that they could cope? Because the Premier League clubs, for the short term at least, will have some sort of stability. What about the EFL clubs?
The further you go down the EFL, the more worrying it gets. Clubs in the Championship do lose a lot of money, but most of them have rich owners who are able to cover those losses or have covered those losses historically. They might be struggling themselves. Certainly in League One and League Two, if we return to football behind closed doors, well, match day income is the biggest component of a club's total revenues. So therefore, speaking to club owners there, they say we're going to get the worst of both worlds. We're playing matches. Many of the matches could be meaningless. If you're not going for a promotion or relegation, the club owners have said to me, well, why on earth are we doing this? Because we've got no money coming in because we can't open the grounds. We've had to go and take players out of furlough and start paying them their full salaries. Under those circumstances, what we'll do is we'll just go and pay the kids. We'll promote the academy lads, and if we win or lose, well, that's fine. But can you see that really will have an impact if you're playing against a team which is going for promotion or relegation?
And talking about just previous to contracts, the transfer window will obviously be affected by this. How do you think the transfer window will cope? Because I think you've been quoted saying that it might collapse. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, if you look at it from an economic perspective, we've got ultimately the market for anything is based on supply and demand. We will have lots of players who clubs will be trying to sell, either because they're desperate for cash or they're trying to get high wage earners off the payroll. In terms of demand, there will be relatively few clubs who can afford to buy players because they're all suffering. So it'll only really be the elite clubs or the clubs with very strong balance sheets who can afford to buy. So you put those two factors together, and you don't have to be an accountant or a banker or an economist to realise, well, we've got more players for sale, we've got fewer people buying. That's going to have a negative impact on price. There is a laboratory called CIES, which operates in Switzerland, and it's crunched its numbers into the spreadsheet. And I think it's looking at around about an overall price fall of 30%, and that was in a publication which came out 3 or 4 weeks ago. Again, if you or I are having this conversation in a few months' time, it could be that it'll be much lower in terms of the average prices for players in top divisions.
So do you think clubs like the Giants will be taking advantage of this situation? You've seen like Manchester United been linked with Jadon Sancho around £100 million. You think that could come down to around 50 60 million pounds? Well,
that will depend upon the strength of Dortmund's balance sheet at the time of any potential bid. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer has spoken to the press, and he says that Manchester United are in a strong position to exploit the market. And I think he's taken criticism for that. I don't think that criticism's really justified, because all he's doing is being honest. A club which is in a strong financial position will be able to take advantage of a market. If the selling club is in a weak financial position, then yes, you get a big discount. My perception of Dortmund is actually that they're probably in a strong position themselves. So I don't think that they'd be looking at a 50 to 60% discount.
And talking about money and rich owners, you've heard about the Newcastle Takeover. How will that be structured? Because, we've heard a lot about the Saudi Arabian owners and how that they could transform Newcastle, but with financial fair play restrictions, we'll probably not see the level of Manchester City or Chelsea. But do you think you could still see a massive overhaul and a massive difference to Newcastle?
I think the expectations of Newcastle fans will be elevated by the takeover. the new owners will not be able to spend the same amount of money as Chelsea as Manchester City, because financial fair play was designed to prevent a further similar takeover turning itself into a feast of crazy purchases and crazy wage bills. What we will see, however, is that by Newcastle United's own standards, the amount of money being invested in the playing budget, and the playing budget consists of two things: transfer fees, loan fees, and wages. So you put those together, and Mike Ashley has been a very criticised owner in Newcastle. I've been to matches. I know just how unpopular he is. But one of the things he has done is that he's left it in a fairly strong financial position. So it's effectively allowing the new owners to come in, and they will be able to spend good money by Newcastle standards. So therefore, I think fans, they'll be in for an exciting time if the new owners decide to spend to the FFP limits. It's not as much as they'd like to spend, of course, but if they go to the limits, they've got a lot of leeway to increase Newcastle's purchasing.
And talking about financial fair play, some people have said that the restrictions should be loosened or tweaked in some sort of way because of the pandemic. Do you think that could happen, or you think that they'll stay strict?
Ultimately, the decisions are made by the owners themselves. Both the Premier League and the EFL owners have regular meetings. If there's a vote to change the rules, and you can see the reasons why, then yes, we could certainly see FFP being loosened, which of course would be great from Newcastle's point of view, although those changes could only potentially be for 2019-20 and 2020-21, with a view to sort of normal service resuming when, we're all hoping for some form of development in terms of a vaccine or some sort of victory in relation to this disease.
Well, Kieran, you've got your book, Price of Football, that is currently out to purchase, and it will be in a link in the description below. So be sure to check that book out. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, thanks very much for the invite. I also do a podcast with comedian Kevin Day, if anybody wants to listen to it. If they got any interest in football finance, we discuss all the stories. We have guests on the show, just like I'm a guest on your show, and it's something to do when doing your daily exercises or walking the dog.
Well, Kieran, thank you for coming on. Remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Remember to check out Price of Football, which we in the link in the description below. Remember to follow Kieran on Twitter and listen to his podcast. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, and see you.